Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Nick Bodmer.
I'm Griffin Hammond, and on this week's episode, I am teaching filmmaking workshops in Dubai, plus taking my camera underwater to film with sharks.
Plus, your questions about jitter and motion blur, settings for time-lapse, and which camera is right for you.
Hello, Nick.
Mr. Dubai himself, as they call you.
We're 12 hours apart right now, which made podcasting difficult.
Yeah, it is 8:30 p.m. my time. I can't do the math. What time is it where you are?
12 hours is easy. It's 8:30 a.m. here.
I set you up for that one. You're welcome.
So I guess I'm about 3 days into my trip so far. And yesterday I did a couple screenings of Sriracha in one of the Emirates called Al Quwain.
And you said one of the Emirates.
Yes.
Emirates are like states, is that right? And they are united? And that's
yeah, pretty much.
They are the United Arab Emirates. Do I have that right?
Yeah, there are 7 Emirates, and I will visit 6 of them on this trip. I'm in Dubai, that's one of them, and we did a screening last night at an arts festival, and did the one in Al Quwain yesterday, and then gonna continue for the next week doing workshops and screenings all over. If you make something that you like, other people will like it. You don't need to think about the audience too much. Make something that makes you happy, and other people will enjoy it too.
So have you found, is Sriracha available in the UAE? Do people know what you're talking about?
Yes, it is available here. Not everyone is aware that it's available. I think it's maybe it's new to stores. It's still kind of hard to find, but the Hoi Fong Foods brand is here.
Wow, they have gone truly international.
Yeah. And
That's exciting.
I'm within, my hotel. I have a pretty nice view of the world's tallest building, the Burj Khalifa.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been pretty hazy most of the days that I've been here. So all I've really done is I took advantage of the fact that it was pretty hazy, and one of my I took a time lapse during sundown, and it looked kind of interesting seeing the.
Yeah, I saw that on Instagram.
rays.
I thought it looked really cool. And you got the cool sun rays coming through the clouds and looked neat.
Yeah. I'm still waiting for a clear day though to get some better shots of that building, or maybe go up in it. We'll see.
Just watch that Mission Impossible, and then you get everything you need.
Right. Well, I wanted to mention a couple comments that we got on last week's episode. Last week we talked about underwater shooting.
Yeah.
And I actually brought my underwater rig with me just because I still am borrowing it, and I figured I didn't know if I'd get many chances to go in the water while I'm here, but I'm on the Persian Gulf, so I'm in a place with water. Maybe I should try it.
So have you gotten underwater yet?
Yeah, I actually it was a little bit touristy to do this, but I went out to the Palm Jumeirah, which is it's one of the land reclamation things that Dubai has done, where they've built an island made out, it's shaped like a palm frond.
Okay.
And there's a resort at the very end of it, farthest out into the Persian Gulf, called Atlantis. It's one of the Atlantis resorts. And they have an aquarium that people can view sharks and rays and fish, but then they also let you snorkel in it.
With sharks?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I thought this would be good practice. I mean, it's kind of a staged environment, but I thought it'd be another good piece of practice for the underwater rig. And so I went snorkeling and tried to film some fish, and yeah, there were sharks underneath my feet.
And did you just show up with the rig and were like, hey, I'd like to snorkel, or did you know somebody there or talk to somebody in advance?
It's a thing you can purchase. It cost, what was it? I think it was 150 dirham, which is not too bad. I think it was $50 or something.
Oh, that's not bad. But are they used to people showing up with huge amounts of camera gear, or was that strange?
No, it seemed completely normal. They were like, cool camera,
okay.
Get in.
So how long did you snorkel for?
It's only a 20-minute session, but it was worthwhile getting in the water. It was kind of cold though.
Today I went to a park and I got very close to a goose. So I've got that going for
Right,
me.
yeah. So we're both like on wildlife adventures right now.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
But
You
I
gotta
wanted to
be
mention
careful
a
with
couple.
those geese. You know, they will bite.
They are
Okay.
defensive.
All right, move along. You were about to say something.
So we got 2 comments that I wanted to mention based on last week's episode. One was an email that I got from Robert, who says that he did underwater photography for over 29 years, and he's retired now. But he had a comment about, I had mentioned when we were in the Dominican Republic together, we noticed that some of the photos I was taking half in, half under the water, the focus was different, right?
Yep.
He said you can actually use what's called a split filter. I guess one of the tricks of the trade is to put a split filter on the camera that actually makes both things in focus.
Okay, so it corrects for one or the other to get the focus to be the same.
Right, yeah.
And I would assume that would have to match the type of lens housing you have around your lens. Does that have an effect, like the size of that dome? Does that have an effect on how off the focus is?
It may be a filter that goes in front of the dome. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if it goes on the camera or not.
Oh, yeah. Well, Robert, if you have any more details, we'd love to hear.
Well, Robert availed himself to me. He says he has plenty of experience he can share with me. We also got a YouTube comment from Matthias who said that he also does a lot of underwater filming, and he confirmed what I was thinking about that red filter that I'm putting on my lens, that maybe that I probably don't need it when I'm just a few feet underwater. He says red filters work best between 3 to 10 meters. Shallower than that, you normally get enough sunlight. And deeper than that, you definitely want some artificial light with you.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense with what I experienced when I was scuba diving in the Dominican. I was about 20 feet down or so, which is right in the middle of that range. And I definitely felt like I would have had plenty of light for video. So
yeah,
just would have to deal with the color shift.
And I kind of regretted using it the first couple times I was using the red filter. And so this time when I was going to go snorkeling, I thought I won't use it this time and we'll see what I get. But I was able to go into the aquarium before I actually did the snorkeling. And so I was able to see these fish through the windows in the aquarium. And just doing a quick test with my camera, realized I think in this environment I will need the red filter. Just putting it on and off, I realized I was getting much better colors. And so I think in this situation, even though I was snorkeling just below the surface of the water, a lot of my subjects were many meters below me. And so I think for anything that was at a distance, it helped to have that filter.
Did you try diving down at all, or did you always stay right at the surface?
I had to stay at the surface. That's how the rules at this place are. You can't do any free diving. Yeah. It was actually interesting because a lot of people that were there snorkeling had never snorkeled and maybe didn't even have a lot of swimming experience. So a lot of the people doing this were like, we all had to wear life jackets and they didn't even give us flippers. And a lot of the people were just like hovered on one of those life rings and not really swimming around.
Would you describe yourself as a strong swimmer?
No.
Strong to quite strong?
No, I'd call myself a below average swimmer. But I know how to swim, I know how to snorkel.
Good.
But I did...
Good.
So I guess I did find that using the red filter worked okay. One thing I noticed, though, is it's kind of weird. It's weird to use the red filter and use the lighting that I have. I was using my lighting, but even in this environment, finding that subjects really had to be just a few feet away from me for them to get lit up. Light gets absorbed pretty quickly underwater. And so the weird thing about using the red filter is that while the environment around you might look pretty normal, it kind of corrects for all that blue. Suddenly, the things that are being lit by my very yellow lights or very blue lights turn purple in front of the camera.
Yeah. You're mixing different colors all over the place.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem. But one nice thing about that is that when I color correct for it and turn that kind of purple red thing in front of the camera into a normal color, it makes the background even bluer. So it kind of enhances it kind of makes the thing in front of you look normal colors very nice and bright, but then you have this really deep, rich blue background. So sometimes that looks nice.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I want to see it.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I'm sharing some of these things in the video right now.
But Griffin, that's in the future, okay? We've covered this. I can't see what you're editing later. Or can I? No.
So should we answer some questions?
Yes, we got a YouTube comment from Adam Prest. Can I listen to your podcast on Soundcloud?
No.
Nope. You know,
kind of.
In my head, I saw this question. And I thought to myself, wasn't SoundCloud like going bankrupt or going out of business? So I did a quick Google before we started, and sure enough, last year it was looking pretty bad. They laid off like 40% of their staff, and they didn't have any money. But then they got another round of funding. They raised another $170 million. So they're back. They're doing good.
Oh, okay.
But we're pretty happy with the standard podcast system, and don't really feel the need to stick it on a lot of other private sites beyond YouTube. Would you agree?
Well, SoundCloud can be a really great platform for podcasting. A lot of people use it. I like SoundCloud, and I was uploading our podcast to it when we first started, but I ran into the limit on free accounts. You can only upload something like 3 or 4 hours. And so I think only episodes 1 through 4 of the podcast are on there. And the idea is that you're supposed to pay $15 a month to get unlimited uploads. You also get some analytics tools, and I think it helps with publishing. Like, it can be a great standalone platform for publishing your podcast. But like I've mentioned before, I was able to spend a little bit more with Squarespace and do essentially the same thing, but I also get a website. So that just made more sense for me.
Yep.
Here's a YouTube comment we got from Terme, who loves the show and shoots with a Canon 5D Mark IV. And he's wondering why his footage looks jittery when he's panning. He says he's shooting at 1/60th of a second. I'm guessing that's his shutter and not his frame rate. Any ideas on how to avoid the shaky footage when panning on my expensive Manfrotto fluid head?
Well, I'll be interested to hear what you have to say, but I mean, if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, which I assume he is with that shutter speed, a little bit of jitter in a pan is a little unavoidable, right?
Yeah, I think even if he's moving that fluid head perfectly, 1/60th of a second is just, it lacks just enough motion blur that you can see the jumps between frames. You especially notice it in 24 frames, but it's still there in 30. I mean, if you were shooting in 60 frames per second, you might be able to eliminate it, but it's just kind of the truth of shooting video is that there's a little gap in between each frame. You could, if you know you're having a problem with a particular pan, you could just open up that shutter even more. If he's shooting 30 frames per second, he could open it up to 1/30th of a second and see if he likes it anymore, but I think that's just a limitation of video.
I was thinking that might be a good time to try some of those intelligent motion blur plugins too. If you already have a shot and it just doesn't feel right, maybe just adding in a little more motion blur might help fake it a little bit.
Well, and that's actually a suggestion we got this week in an email from Christoph. He said if you want to add some motion blur, he's actually specifically talking about time lapses, but it works for video too, that I've always used a plugin for Final Cut called Real Smart Motion Blur, but he points out that you can do this in After Effects. There's an effect called Pixel Motion Blur, where After Effects actually analyzes where your pixel is in one frame and then where it is in the next frame, and you can set a shutter angle in the plugin or in the effect, and it will add the appropriate amount of motion blur.
Oh, that's cool.
So that would be good for time lapses, but also if you're doing I imagine the main reason it's there is people may want to do effects shots in After Effects, and they are purposefully shooting at a fast shutter speed to get that crisp detail, and then they can add back in fake motion blur to make it look like normal video.
That kind of goes along with an Instagram comment we got from Corporate Video Productions. Can you chat about getting the shutter speed correct in a time lapse? His always end up overexposed, or her.
Yeah, this is why I use ND filters, because if I'm trying to get a shutter speed that matches my interval, if I'm doing a 1 second interval, on a time lapse, I want a half-second shutter speed to get the appropriate amount of motion blur for that. But invariably, any lens I put on the camera, if I'm shooting outside and I do a half-second shutter, it's going to be way too bright. So yeah, you'll definitely have overexposing problems. And I don't want to close my lens down to f/22 and see all the dust on the lens. So that's why I'm putting on either an ND, what are they? An ND.9, which is 3 stops darker, or an ND3, which is 1,000 times darker.
Which did you use recently? I saw on Instagram you had a really cool, I guess it was 2 shots. You kind of showed your camera shooting a time lapse in a city of some sort of civic center or something, and then you showed the actual time lapse you had shot, which had some really excellent motion blur and lighting. What were you using there? Where was that?
So I was in Philadelphia shooting a time lapse for a documentary piece I'm working on, and it was early in the morning. It was like the sun was rising, so I definitely didn't want my darkest ND. I was probably using my ND.9, my 3-stop ND filter. And let me pull up the actual settings I used, because that was actually a question we got from Motioneer on Instagram, wondering exactly
Just
what
looking
settings.
at it, I would guess you're using like an f6.3 with a half-second shutter, 1 second interval, probably like ISO 200 at 8mm. I don't know. What do you think? Am I close?
Yeah, that's exactly the notes that I wrote in the script. Good job.
Oh. But maybe I put those in there, just my guess.
Yeah, so I mean that points out that at a 1 second interval, at a half-second shutter, that's about as quick as I could be shooting a time lapse. Even at that, I need to drop down the aperture to f6.3. I'm using my lowest ISO possible. It's possible I wasn't using the ND filter if I was at f6.3. I'm not sure, but definitely I need to like pull all my exposure down as low as I can go to get that kind of thing.
Yep. And of course, when you're setting your shot up, before you begin actually firing off the time lapse on an intervalometer, you can just take one quick, shutter and see how your exposure looks. So if you're having trouble with it being overexposed, that's something you can check pretty easily and adjust before you begin the intervalometer.
That's what I always do. The G85 has a mode dial where you have to turn it all the way to the end to get to the intervalometer time-lapse mode, and it's stupid to do your test shot that way because it'll just start going. So I always turn it all the way back to a regular single shot, and I'll take one frame. And actually, I usually take a few, and I'm kind of tweaking the settings until I get it just right, and then I switch over. And I always make sure to switch my focus to manual right before I do the time lapse. I'll set my focus automatically for the first test shots, and then I want to make sure it's not changing focus every shot.
Another Instagram comment from Jose Antonio Cordova. Hi, Griffin. Why does the sky seem to light up? Does it have to do with the white balance or the cars passing by?
So yeah, he's noticing a problem that I had in this time lapse, and it was a rare problem for me. When I brought it in and started editing it, when I first threw everything into Final Cut and played it back, I was getting a lot of like exposure variation. It was kind of flashing. Things would get brighter and darker and brighter and darker. And I've heard people tell me they've had this problem before, that like not every exposure on a camera is perfectly the same. And I've always said, well, on my camera it has been. So this was the first time I shot a time lapse where the exposure seemed to be changing. And it was hard for me to figure out exactly why it was happening. I do kind of think maybe it was the cars going by. Nothing on the camera was auto, so it wasn't changing its exposure, but I think that maybe the cars driving by the camera with their headlights on were maybe getting some extra light into the lens and kind of polluting the shots.
Huh.
So I think it was just those moments that traveled.
I didn't notice that. I'm going to look again.
So I tried to correct for it because this is one of the reasons you use the LR time-lapse program. I finally figured out how to use it. You load your images into Lightroom, and then you open up LR time-lapse, and it reads all the metadata.
Oh, yeah, I can see it kind of strobing the sky. Yeah. And you think it's just internal reflections in the lens or something from headlights?
I think it has to be, because I've settled on this idea because after I ran it through LR time-lapse can analyze the exposure of every frame, and it's cool. It kind of charts it out for you. And then it can say, well, if we know that the exposure is going up and down, I can counteract that. And so you can play around with some settings, and it'll darken some shots and lighten some shots. And I kept going through this process over and over and over again. And every time I did it, I was still getting flicker, because I think it seemed like almost everything in the shot is maybe flickering at a different rate. Like, I don't know. Maybe the headlights were lighting up the buildings.
Is it looking at the overall exposure of each image? Because with different lighting elements moving through the frame, each frame is going to have a different overall exposure. Can you limit it to just the sky or something?
You can limit it. So at first I was letting it analyze the entire image, but then when I realized I was still getting the flicker, I was able to, I can set like a boundary box and just analyze one side of the building or just the sky. I tried to just do the sky because it was really bothering me that the sky was kind of pulsating. Mm-hmm. And I think in the end, I just realized that each part of the frame was doing something different. So if I corrected the sky, I would still get the flicker on the buildings. And if I corrected the buildings, I would still get flicker on the sky. So I ended up just kind of splitting the difference. So I think what you're seeing on Instagram is the least bad version of it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I did not notice until I went for a second viewing and specifically looked for it. So,
yeah.
But our audience is quick. Can't get any by them, Griffin.
I even worried in the time lapse that I shot in Dubai. I really pushed the color and exposure of the raw images in Lightroom after I shot it. And I noticed at the end of that time lapse, it kind of flickers between kind of green and purple color. It's almost like I pushed it too far and the color gets kind of messed up at the end. So I was worried that people would see that and notice that as well.
And judge you harshly.
Yeah.
Your skills and your value as a human.
Right. We got a great question also on that Instagram post. He was wondering, this is Full Color Films, wondering what the interval was. And yeah, we shot that was a second interval. He also says, the podcast is brilliant, but I always presume that Nick is playing down his camera filmmaking knowledge to act as your foil. Can you confirm or deny?
Yeah, anytime I say something wrong, it's just me pretending. That's what it is. What do you think, Griffin? Can you confirm or deny?
I think you do kind of play a character on the podcast, where you set me up with these nice layups.
I do occasionally play devil's advocate a little bit, or ask a question I know the answer to, so you can answer it. That I guess is true. Sorry, everybody.
But it is fair to say that in our professional lives, I spend more time thinking about video and filmmaking, and your full-time job is in information technology.
That's true. But I at least have the language, I think, to engage you in a discussion on the topic and hopefully pull out some interesting tidbits from you for the audience. That's my goal.
And everyone clearly already knows that if we're talking about hard drives and computer things, you know way more than me.
Yes. I think that has become very clear.
I didn't even throw this question in our script this week, but we did get a YouTube comment. I can't remember from who was wondering if you and I would consider ourselves best friends.
No. I barely know him. Don't even like him. What do you think, Griffin?
I said I believe we are.
Yeah, I think so. We've got a couple other best friends we might throw into the mix, but we're like the kids from South Park.
We're the best friends that podcast together.
That's true. I tried to get another podcast going with some of those other friends, but they didn't want to invest the time or effort, so
maybe they're not as good friends as you thought. And they're listening right now. They know who they are.
They know who they are. If they claim to listen. Do you think they really do? we'll find out, I
They
guess.
probably listen to the first like 10 minutes and then leave.
They're like, oh, great podcast, guys. I listened, really. We got a YouTube comment from Matter Graphica, who always has excellent questions. Question for you guys, more for Griffin, really. When you're shooting a time lapse, what do you usually do with the camera? What do you usually do while the camera is shooting? I don't do a lot of time lapses. I went out yesterday, literally shooting in the middle of this busy road. I have no idea what to do for half an hour while the camera is doing the time lapse.
I do like this question.
That's what Twitter's for, right? Basically, I mean, I don't know. What else do you do?
What do you do when you've done some time lapses?
I've usually been with people, so and you know me, I can't stand still, so I usually just walk around and try and keep my camera within my line of sight. But I probably just play on my phone, or you take a video of your camera shooting the time lapse, because everybody wants that shot, right? I don't know. What do you do?
Well, yeah, I usually am shooting something else. Usually I set up one time lapse, it's going, and a lot of times I'll set up a second time lapse with my second camera, or I will be using my second camera body to shoot B-roll. You know, I can kind of run around with one camera while the other one's doing some work. That always, I feel like that always speeds up my workflow, that I can get two things done at the same time. But most of the time I'm setting my camera for a 1 second shutter, or a 1 second interval with a half-second shutter, so that I can be done as quickly as possible. And at that speed, you really only need about 5 minutes of shooting to get a good time lapse if you're getting good cloud movement. So that's not too bad. When I'm doing night photography, that's when it's hard, and I have to spend 30 minutes shooting.
Alone with your thoughts.
Yeah, and then I'll just sit down or go inside. This morning I shot a time lapse out my window while I went and had breakfast.
Smart.
Here is an email that we got from Joe, who says that he's pretty serious about buying the camera you have, Nick, the G85.
There it is right there. I'm pointing at it.
He's been watching eBay and some other places to try to get a good deal on it. He also mentions the G7, that it got a pretty hefty price cut, and he's wondering if the price of the G85 might come down. Essentially, do you think the G85 is good buy right now at $900? That includes the kit 12 to 60 millimeter lens.
What do you think?
What did you pay for yours?
I paid $1,000.
And that was a brand new one.
That was brand new with the kit lens that I sold because I didn't need it.
Yeah.
I'm just looking on. Are you familiar with the website Camel?
Yes. It shows like Amazon prices over time or something.
Yeah. So I just pulled it up. That kit that bundle has always been $1,000, except for a short period in December, probably pre-Christmas, where it dropped down to $900. So $900 is a pretty good deal.
For a new one.
Sure, I was just going to say, I'd be sure you're getting a new one. I mean, a lot of times on eBay, you are still getting new equipment, but I wouldn't buy a used one for $900. I'd spend the money to get a brand new one, and then, yeah.
But yeah, I wish I had some intel about like new Panasonic cameras coming out, if that price would come down.
But I think it's worth every penny, especially if you're on a budget, and, you know, it sounds like Joe is on a budget. I think the G85 is a steal at $800 with the lens.
And you must have also been looking at the G7, right? And you decided the G85 is the way to go?
I must have. I don't remember what pushed me into the G85. I think it was the in-body image stabilization. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I feel like the G7 doesn't have that, yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty
nice feature.
Yep.
And that feature comes up in our next question, a YouTube comment we got from Chris, who is looking between the GH5, the camera that I have, that does have in-body image stabilization, and the new GH5S, which is better in low light, but doesn't have in-body image stabilization. So he says he does a lot of handheld work, which makes him lean more towards getting the GH5, especially since I don't have lenses that have in-body image stabilization, or in-body stabilization. Sorry, he says in-body stabilization, but the lenses have what's called optical image stabilization. On the other hand, I do a lot of filming in low light, which is where I'm leaning towards the GH5S. I don't have access to a gimbal in most cases, as I normally work in tight spaces. Just wondering your opinion because you've used both. He currently has the G85, so there's another happy G85 user. He loves the camera, but he's ready to go more advanced.
Bump it up to the next level. Well, I've got two thoughts. Can I give? Yeah. I'll give my quick thoughts, and I'll be quick. And then, since you've used the camera, so you can give like a real opinion. But One, if you're keeping the G85 with in-body image stabilization, maybe it makes sense to get the GH5S, and then you kind of have the best of both worlds. If you're dumping the G85, I would get the GH5. I think if you're doing handheld work and things like that, you're going to want in-body image stabilization, and then just work on maybe getting some fast glass for low light. So I think if it were my only camera, I'd want the GH5. If it's going to be an addition, the GH5S certainly adds something interesting. Now, Mr. Hammond, what do you think?
I agree with that. That's a good point. If he's keeping the G85, I do lean towards the GH5 for this because he doesn't have a gimbal, especially because his lenses don't have stabilization. In all the years that I've been shooting with GH cameras, I've always had a preference for the Panasonic lenses that have OIS in the lens, because I do think having some sort of stabilization makes a big difference. The in-body image stabilization, it makes an even bigger difference, but I mean, if he's only using lenses that need it and wants to do handheld, I would never put a prime lens with no stabilization on a GH4, for example, or on a GH5S, just because I think you're going to notice a lot of jitter. Yeah.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. And I also think people get really excited about low light ability, but I have been plenty happy with what I shoot with the GH5. And I think low light gets a little bit overblown because generally I don't feel like you want to shoot in the dark. There are some times when you have to shoot in bad situations or by candlelight, but that shouldn't be your goal. You should find the good light. Put your subject near a window. So I wouldn't always be chasing the lowest light possible. I would get a camera that can kind of handle all your filmmaking. Now I feel like I'm telling you not to buy the GH5S. Like, I'm a terrible ambassador.
You are a terrible ambassador. But no, I mean, I think if for someone who's shooting handheld, the GH5 is going to be the default choice. Like we said, the GH5S isn't necessarily an upgrade over the GH5. It is kind of an alternative. Yeah. And
I do think I'm playing down the low light capability of the GH5S. I mean, that's one of its biggest selling points. But I think if I were going to get a GH5S, the reason would not be to be a low light beast. It would be to get the enhanced dynamic range. It would be for shooting HDR kind of stuff. Like there's other benefits to that camera besides its low light ability.
And you don't have one yet still, huh?
Nope. I'm
Interesting.
Getting everything I need with the GH5.
I'm just thinking maybe Panasonic's going to send one my way these days, one of these days. They're going to say, Nick, your work on the podcast has been outstanding. Give this a whirl.
It's just going to come with a letter that says, we've really enjoyed your work on the podcast.
A telegram will arrive. Dear sir, stop. We love your podcast.
Oh.
Stop.
Well, I think next week when I get back to the States, we're going to be talking about frame rates.
Ooh.
And I had an interesting conversation with a friend about why we use the frame rates we do and why we don't use faster frame rates. So we can answer that question next week.
Beautiful.
We're keeping it a little bit short this week so that on my slow hotel internet, I can make sure I can get Nick's files from him.
Yeah, we'll see how this goes.
You're either listening to this at the normal time on Wednesday or
it's
much
late.
later.
If I have to, I could always encode them down for you.
No, I think this will be good. We're also recording this earlier than usual, so.
Beautiful. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Mr. Hammond, stay safe. We'll see you soon.
Yeah. See you later.
I am ready.
Okay. 1 second. I just realized my buttons are not buttoned on this shirt. Okay.
Get the clothes on, Griffin.
Now I'm ready. It was just the collar buttons.